Two bikes, same rider, same tracks. Let's see which one survives, and frankly, if I survive the experience as well, because my wheelhouse is not adventure bikes when it comes to off-road. So this was very educational. Let's get into what I found and which one of these beasties is the better choice in the dirt.
Okay, you got it.
Make this a fair comparison, I took the same tracks in the same weather conditions. Both are on the exact same tyres, Bridgestone AX41s, and both bikes I kept at the same pressures. Same amount of crash protection on each, and I set out on both bikes with a full tank of fuel. And both of these bikes had the same old muppet with minimal skills riding these two bikes in the dirt. For the same amount of money, you can get either of these two bikes. And while on a spec sheet, they look very, very different, when you think about it, they both try and accomplish the exact same thing. But I'm getting ahead of myself because the GS was not ready for the dirt. I needed to get crash protection, not only to make it fair with the Himalayan weight-wise, but also just because a muppet like me, I'm always dropping my bike. So let's head to Dream Adventure Motorcycles and sort that out. Hopefully that's the last look at the GS without crash guards and without bark busters. We're here at Dream Adventure Motorcycles to get all that stuff fitted this morning, so let's get it done.
But then the hole doesn't line up, so I can cut this off and shape it the same like that and drill a new hole in here. It's not the end of the world.
Is that going to be a lot of faff for you?
Nah, it's not. It's just...
What do you reckon that's the way to go over the universe?
To be honest, to have it mounted on a, not on a tapered part, is more solid.
Okay.
On the tapered parts, like if you look at some of the off-road bikes, like my race bike, I've got it mounted actually on here with a big clamp.
Yeah.
Much more solid. On a squared up section here, much better.
If it's not going to put you out, then sure, let's do that. Boy, does it look good when it's got all that crash protection. Sitting in the dirt, it looks absolute magic. So I've got a few chapter times listed on the old phone here, and I think the best place to start is with the engines, because that is where the biggest difference is found between both of these bikes. Single cylinder versus parallel twin, and the GS makes over double the power. Does double the power and double the torque provide you a better experience off-road or a worse experience off-road? I really think this is a skill-based and personality-based option. If you're the kind of guy, you like the thrills, you've got the skills, and you enjoy really giving the bike some when you're riding off-road, I think the bigger GS is going to be more engaging for you. That 85 horsepower and the 80 odd Newton meters of torque is really a lot of fun. Now on the flip side of that, because it does have a decades old traction control system.
Okay. Well, that was more arse than class.
It does get tricky managing all of that power off-road. You rarely can use all of that power putting it down into the dirt. The wheel's just going to spin and spin. And I found the traction control, it's more like an on-off switch. I found it intrusive and frustrating. It wasn't gradual, and it didn't always help me out when I needed it. Lugging along on the torque, it does stall quite easily. So the Himalayan isn't quite as bad. So that's also a little niggle I had as well. Because it isn't a 270-degree engine, it's just a traditional firing order. It doesn't quite have the lumpy bottom end of a modern adventure bike. So I was missing that a bit too.
Ah, yep.
Whereas the Himalayan is a lot more easygoing in its power delivery. It feels far more manageable because it's so docile at low RPMs, that chug of the single cylinder. The GS really feels like it's always ready to go. It's on the edge. It wants to be unleashed. Whereas the Himalayan just feels like a dependable little donkey chugging along. Whatever you put in front of it, it's going to get through it. It's not going to be flashy, but it'll do the job. The other thing I've talked about is the suspension. I've gone on about this on the road, but it's no different when you hit the dirt. Given that this is bargain basement suspension with Showa unadjustable forks up front, as well as just preload in the rear, this bike is fantastic off-road. Given if you really start to turn up the heat and ride it like a dirt bike, it's going to be out of its depth. But if you ride it like a dual sport or a small adventure bike, it's going to take whatever you put in front of it and get you through and do a really good job. You do have to push it before you find the extent of the suspension. Of course, that's going to change if you're a bit heavier and if you ride really hard. But I think for the general day-to-day rider, it's bang on and off-road. And I'd say it's the same for the GS. I was surprised because I've read reviews of the suspension on the F800 over the years, and there's always complaints of it being too soft, undersprung, etc., etc. It really isn't up to task for a middleweight adventure bike. And I would say that is both true and untrue. As always, it really depends on what kind of rider you are. If you are more on the Chris Birch spectrum of adventure bike riders, you like to ride hard, fast through technical terrain, yes, you're going to find the limits of this suspension. It's 214 kilos. I think the suspension is just as good off-road as the Himalayan, and I think the Himalayan suspension is quite good. And then you got to consider this has the electronic suspension adjustment, so you can change it on the fly on the rear. So if you want it softer or harder, it is fantastic. So I was really surprised at 12-year-old suspension that tends to get a bit of criticism online. I didn't have any problems, but then I'm not riding really hard terrain and I'm not riding really fast and I'm not that heavy. I'm maybe 85 kilos in my gear. So consider that as well. Let's talk about the weight of these bikes because there is what I would consider a significant difference. They are fairly closely matched, but you're still talking about roughly 17 kilos or thereabouts. This factory standard is 196 kilograms wet weight, whereas the GS wet weight is about 214 kilos. This bike here is closer to the ground, so it doesn't quite feel as top heavy as the GS. That's not how it feels when you get it off the kickstand because it's leaned over so far. But once you're in the dirt, you're on the bike, you do notice that this feels a little more nimble. The turning circle's easier too, so that obviously helps. But the weight is more manageable. You do notice that, 17, 18 kilos or thereabouts. Now, what I will say is it really is comparing heavy with heavier. This doesn't feel like a light, nimble bike. This Himalayan, at least compared to the GS, does a very good job of hiding that weight. It really can feel a little bit like an oversized dual sport in a lot of ways. And I found that really beneficial for my type of riding because I'm not the best rider. That old adage of go as light as you possibly can when riding off-road properly, that was definitely true in this case. I found this more manageable, my confidence was higher, and I also was less fatigued because I wasn't worried about the line I was choosing so much because it felt like less of a commitment on the little Himalayan. I felt like I could just point it anywhere and I could get through it. Whereas as we flip over to the GS, it was a little bit of a different case. And I really have been one of those guys that say, always go light as you can off-road. And I think this bike has proved that point, that while this was competent, suspension's great, it handles well for its size, and as long as you're happy to manage the power that it makes, it's pretty competent. It still was a limiting factor for my skill level. I was slower, more nervous, a little more stressed, and I wasn't able to choose the line as well as I would on a smaller bike. So I think the old adage of go as light as you can without sacrificing too much of your comfort is still a very correct statement to make. I think this is actually a really well-balanced middleweight adventure bike, and it hides its weight quite well. The problem really starts is super slow stuff and when you're trying to maneuver around.
Oh. Oh, bloody hell.
When you're moving along on the trails, this does do quite a good job of hiding its weight. So I think once you're moving, the disparity goes away. It's just that real slow speed when you're feathering the clutch a lot and you've got to manhandle it through the corners or the obstacle. That's when the weight of this bike kind of really makes itself known. When you don't have momentum to aid you in hiding the weight, that's when it rears its ugly head. Now on the flip side, that extra weight really comes in handy when you're just barreling down dirt roads at higher speeds. I found this really comfortable and reassuring out on the dirt roads. That extra weight just makes this feel more planted. It wasn't wiggling around on me as much. This had far more rear grip because the petrol tank is at the rear as well. That extra weight, it felt like I had a little more grip on the dirt roads as well. While I'm sitting here, let's talk about standing and sitting comfort and fatigue off-road. I found the ergonomics on both very, very good for off-road. If you're standing up, excuse me as my head pops out of film, but I find I'm right in the sweet spot. You've got a little bit of a bend in your legs to absorb the impact. My arms, I can get my elbows up, but it's still nice and comfortable. Reach to the controls is fantastic. And I really find that the bike suits my size person, average height. I think if you're between the heights of say 5'8" to 6'1", these bikes straight out of the box are going to suit you very well. So I found the ergonomics very good on the GS, but also surprisingly good on the Himalayan. Despite it side by side next to the GS, it looks like a 3/4 size motorcycle. So standing on the Himalayan, how does that stack up to the GS? Well, it is definitely, you notice, a little bit tighter, at least at my height. You feel like you're a little more pitched over the front wheel. I think the GS has got a little more room for my sized frame, but it certainly is pretty good stock considering, I mean, you can see the size differential between both bikes. It is a physically much larger motorcycle, so it makes sense that this is a little tighter and a little smaller. So standing up, it's not cramped, but definitely you notice you've got a little less space to work with, and I feel like you're a little more pitched over the front wheel, but it certainly still is a great standing position for me. I'm in control. I've got room to bend my elbows out and be in that perfect position for me, and a little bit of a bend in my knees for control through the pegs to shift my weight. One of the issues with going off-road is you need somewhere to store all your stuff, particularly a tubed bike like this. You need your tire levers, your tube, etc., etc. And I had nowhere to put it on the GS, but luckily for me, Nelson at the Adventure On store sorted me out. So let's head there to see what Nelson had in store for me luggage-wise.
Good morning.
Morning, Nelson. How are you?
Good morning, yourself?
How was the rally?
Awesome, mate.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Righty, so Nelson's kindly donated a hat. We've got a 25-litre duffel bag, the two 12-litre panniers, which I find are the best for dual sports and work just as fine on adventure bikes. Got the bungee nest, exhaust guard, which I need on the GS because I've already melted bags on there. Bottle holder, and we got a little tail bag, don't we? The
Tail bag or crash bar bag.
crash bar bag. It's kind of pretty versatile. So thank you very much, Nelson.
Well done.
So head down to Adventure On in Midvale if you want some of this stuff, because this is actually your line of bags,
It's
isn't it?
our brand, yeah. We are the importers into the country, and we help with the design of the products as well and everything.
Nice.
So you can find it at MX store, BMW Off-Road sells them as well, Adventure On store sells them as well, or you can go and buy it directly on osadrivepack.com.au. You can buy
But they
them
should
directly
come here, shouldn't they, Nelson?
as well. Yeah,
Spend your money here. Cheers, mate. Thank you.
no problem.
Nelson at Adventure On Store has sent me out this lovely little OSAR dry pack. It's been just the perfect size for me to get my tubes in there, my tyre irons, tyre inflator, and a little set of tools in there, as well as some few odds and ends just to tackle whatever adventure problems I have. And the lovely little thing about this, other than it being tapered so it fits a rear rack really nicely, this little Velcro bit on top, you might think that's a bit of a gimmick, but trust me, when you're a muppet like me and you're always dropping your gloves on and off, being able to just stick the Velcro on there, your glove is stuck on there, it's not falling off. That is just a nice little touch that I absolutely love. So cheers, Nelson. And if you want yourself an affordable little gear bag, this OSAR Dry Pack 12 litre is fantastic. Check out the whole range if you're looking for some really good, affordable luggage for your next adventure. And cheers, Nelson. Head over to the Adventure On store. Let's talk about the brakes now, because that definitely is a very different experience off-road on both of these bikes. This has fantastic front brakes, twin front discs, Brembo calipers. It'll stop on a dime. It really is good brakes despite the age of the bike. But that is also something you've got to be aware of off-road. You can't just grab a fistful of front brake in all situations on the GS. Because of the power of those brakes, it really can break traction quite easily. So you do have to be cognizant of these superior brakes off-road. Whereas the Himalayan, the braking performance on the front is significantly reduced. So you don't need the same amount of finesse off-road grabbing the front brake in my experience. Now the rear brakes, I find the rear brakes on the Himalayan way better than the rear brakes on the GS. It's got a bigger rear disc. There's more finesse to the rear brake on the Himalayan. You really can gradually apply the rear brake to your desire. Whereas I found the GS's rear brake, perhaps it was a little to do with the awkwardness of trying to get my MX boot in on the brake lever, but it felt more like an on-off switch. There was nothing. Then you really have to put your foot down, and then all of a sudden it's everything and you're just sliding the back wheel. Let's talk about fuel range, because that really is one of those specifications that as adventure riders or dual sport riders, we really obsess over these details, because as we all know, adventure riding can get you in some really remote places. This will do, if you baby it along, it'll do about 350 kilometers, that's the GS. But this, if you baby it along, will do about 450 kilometers. This little Himalayan does about 100 kilometers more to a tank than the big GS does. And that is really important on longer rides, how much fuel you'll have to take. For instance, there is going to be a lot of riding in this trip I'm planning next year where it's going to be 450 kilometers and possibly more in some cases between fuel stops. So that means a lot of the time I'm going to be able to get away with not having to fill up my fuel bladder to make it to the next station. The extra range really does help when you're doing those bigger trips. So I think fuel range is acceptable on both, but really quite a standout feature of the Himalayan. And it's one of the things you got to think about with, yes, this is a small adventure bike with a 450cc single cylinder, but the reason it's quite heavy is because it has quite a large tank for its size. 17 litres, and it manages to do 450 kilometers. The GSA version of this F800 is a better comparison for range, but it certainly is significantly heavier than the 450 Himalayan. So there really is an unsung superpower of this bike, is how far you can do on a tank. But let's talk about reliability. Well, what I can say is that the F800 and the F700, and basically any of the GSs that use this Rotax engine, legendary in their reliability. A few little niggles, but bulletproof reliability. Just, there are instances of these bikes doing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of kilometers. BMW really prioritize longevity, serviceability, and reliability over peak performance and flash. So some might criticize it for a parallel twin that doesn't quite have the character of a lot of other, particularly modern middleweights, but what it lacks in character, it makes up for in just dependability. And that gives you a lot of confidence when you're riding in remote areas, particularly when you're on an older bike and you might be worried about that age creeping in and things going wrong. Generally speaking, these are very reliable bikes, and because they're 12 years old, They're far simpler than a modern adventure bike. This doesn't have an NFT screen and 100 electronic gizmos. Yes, it has some electronics, but it's certainly not to the same extent. So I think reliability-wise, you really can't go wrong with a Rotax-powered GS. I've got a full service history. I've had it looked over by an independent mechanic who's given it a full bill of health as well. You've seen that video. So it just goes to show you how reliable these bikes are. 55,000 kilometers, 12 years of ownership. And in those 12 years, all that hasn't worked is the horn button and a small dent in the front rim. Then we move over to the Himalayan 450. Squeaky brakes seems to be a feature of Himalayans, at least in the first few thousand kilometers. And this bike is no exception. You've seen that in my complaints video of the Himalayan, that the brakes squeak. But it doesn't hinder the performance of the bike. Now, reliability wise, I would say it's early days for this bike. It's been out for about a year now. We've had a year's worth of riders being on these bikes to find problems. There's no major issues with this bike. What I would say is there does seem to be some quality control issues. Bolts aren't always as tight as they should be. Clearances, and I've heard a few people's wheels not being quite aligned. So it really seems like a quality control out of the factory. So you just need to be on it with the dealership, making sure they go over it with a fine-tooth comb. Fortunately for me, I had a good one, got it from a good dealership, and no issues whatsoever. But I think generally speaking, a very reliable motorcycle, considering how new it is. It's a very simple single cylinder, easy to work on, nothing complicated, no complicated electronics to worry about either. And although early days, it seems to be on track to be a very reliable adventure bike. And I think we should probably talk about, when it comes to reliability and talking about the wheels, this is tubeless, this is tubed. Now, the GS famously has quite a soft front rim at least, or both rims are quite soft. Case in point, I've got a dent in my front rim, so that's something to consider. And this is tubeless. And this also has some reports of slow leaks in the tubeless rims in some cases. So I find myself on both bikes running pretty high pressures off-road. But as far as getting a puncture and you're out in the middle of nowhere, this is going to be far easier to repair. Literally 10 minutes and you're going to be back on the trails having fun. Now, one thing you might not think about with both of these bikes is both of these bikes have roadside assistance packages that you can get brand new. So when I bought mine brand new, you get 3 years of BMW's roadside assistance, which is very, very good. The Himalayan has the same features. So as of now, it comes with a little card and you have roadside assistance for the Himalayan. So that is an advantage of this new. If I break down in the middle of nowhere, I can call Royal Enfield free of charge, send someone to pick me up and the bike. Whereas the GS, I've got to pay for that service now. It's not a new bike, and in some cases, they won't let you put that bike on. It's only for BMWs. Yes, I could get it for this F800, but it's at a cost to me of $150 Australian a year. Great service, but I've got to pay for it. It was closer than I thought it was going to be. Admittedly, the Himalayan 450 is better when the going gets tough. There's no question that I'm more comfortable, more confident, and quicker on the Himalayan than I am on the F800GS. This, I can hop on these trails and I'm not stressed. I'm happy to ride by myself, as you can see now. Whereas the F800GS, I would truly, if I was keeping it long term, if I do decide to keep the F800GS, truly it's a bike that you only take on a group ride. Because if you do go proper off-road and you fall off, it's going to be a little bit of trouble picking that thing back up. This is 14 kilos lighter. It's smaller as well. I feel like it's an easier bike to manhandle around. But in saying that, this is surprisingly good. I found that a lot of my worries were more in my head than the bike's actual ability. The bike is very competent indeed. It's more the skills of the rider that's the limitation. So I'm very surprised at how good this is off-road, considering its size, how tall the seat is, and the extra weight that it has over the Himalayan. So I think if you're really set on you want more power, but you're worried about how deep you can go off-road, it really is rider skill that's going to be your limitation, not the middleweight adventure bike. But that's really what's the focus here. My rider skills are not the best. I am limited in my ability and in the amount of time I have to go and get extra skills and keep those skills up. I really need a bike that's super easy to ride and doesn't require much skill at all. The Himalayan 450 suits me much better. So it's the better bike, I think, for the beginner, the returning rider, or the person that just putts along and doesn't have many technical off-road skills. If you can ride and you still want to be comfortable on the highway, this obviously makes the smarter choice. I definitely think this makes a fantastic do anything adventure tourer though. If I was going around Australia, I'd be hard pressed to dissuade you from choosing a middleweight like this, because it's off-road capable enough that whatever you put in front of it, as long as you get your head right and you've got the skills, you can get through it. But it's incredibly comfortable out on the open road in a way that the Himalayan just can't match. So I think in the dirt category, this has clearly won it for me. Next episode will be the big decision, whether I keep this or whether I keep the Himalayan 450, and it's gonna be a tough one because I love them both. This because of its highway prowess, and Himalayan because it's just such a great backroads explorer. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna have to do some soul searching. But until then, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and as always, don't forget to stay shiny side up, and I'll see you in the next one.